welcome everybody. It's great, as Lauren says, to see some familiar faces and some not so familiar faces, or indeed boxes on the screen. I'm Owen. I'm the head of membership and programs for Woodcraft Folk, and Lauren, who's part of my team and program manager, is presenting with me this evening. We are going to kick off with a little bit of an opportunity for you to tell us what's going on for you and what you're hoping to get.
Which is, what is your favourite thing about going on a camp or residential with Woodcraft Folk? If you haven't been on one before with Woodcraft Folk, this is your first venture into that, maybe what you're most looking forward to on going to one, if you haven't been to one already. Yeah, some great things in there. All things that I also enjoy: mixing of ages, bringing different people together, being out in the nature, being sociable, and young people hopefully also being sociable. Kids having freedom to play together, and campfires, fire, enjoying some time to do things that we might not normally do in our homes, and when we're living out normal everyday lives, especially like myself, if you live in the city, not often that you're able to have a fire without a garden and that sort of thing. Thanks so much for that. I'll pass back over to Owen.
I thought I was holding.
I'm going to tell us okay, what we're going to cover this evening. Hopefully, everybody knows that we're here to talk about camping and residentials. We are going to talk about, why do we go camping? Why does our organisation like to do that? What are the benefits of that, and what are the different ways that we can go on camping and residential trips? We're going to talk about the minimum expectations of what Woodcraft Folk expects of you all as volunteers, being in charge of young people, taking young people away and being responsible for their well-being and our own well-being as adults. We're going to go through the camping and residential checklist, which is an essential part of complying with what we expect, those minimum expectations, and how we can check that those minimum expectations are being met before groups go away on trips. And then we're going to talk you through where we can find some further support on our website, and also from external bodies like NYA and other places. So hopefully that will cover most of what people wanted to find out. We'll also have time at the end for questions, or, as I said, anything that's more specific to the things that you're planning at the moment. So why do we go camping? I'm sure that lots of the things that we just had in the Menti are part of why we go camping: to enjoy being out in the nature, to be with young people, to get to know our groups a bit better, get to know the other volunteers that we're working with a bit better. We like to think that when we go camping, we're creating kind of temporary utopias, places where we can live in the sort of ideal world, an ideal world by the kind of aims and principles of Woodcraft Folk. We're working together, cooperating. We are out in nature, looking after our environment, trying to be as kind to our environment as we can whilst we're away, and kind of creating those ideals where people are treated fairly and that everybody is kind of listened to and respected and has a chance to do things that they enjoy and try out new skills. So we want to develop and deepen friendships, as we said, and as some people said in the Menti, that's between volunteers and between adults, and also between young people. One of the best things about Woodcraft Folk is having those moments where there's, you know, a 17-year-old helping a 6-year-old to do the washing up together, and that's the moments that I think really help our camps kind of thrive, of people developing those friendships and those connections. Also, a great thing to do at a camping and residential trip is to build up confidence and skills. Things like using kitchen appliances that people haven't used before. Tin openers often seems to be a big one. Lots of young people that I take away say, oh, I've seen this in my kitchen, but I've never used one before. And then, you know, it's a great time for them to try out some new skills and to build up confidence in being away from their parents or carers at home, being away from their sort of home environments, and learning some new things whilst they're there. Developing independence, exactly the same, having time away from their homes, doing things that they might not do at home, whether that's cooking, whether that's washing up, whether that's just playing with a little bit more freedom and a little bit more space. As I say, young people who are coming from less kind of rural areas might not have experienced having, you know, time to play in the open field and that sort of thing. We also really want to encourage our young people and our adults to kind of learn to lead others, to kind of take on some of those leadership roles. Again, doing that all cooperatively, working together, sharing our skills, teaching each other. Everybody has something to give and something to learn. And we really want to encourage our young people of all ages to take on roles, whether that's kind of being a clan leader, so taking on a role of helping other people prepare food or to wash up, or to help keep the site tidy, whether that's teaching other people how to build a fire, whether that's learning how to read a map and taking everybody on a walk, that sort of thing. So lots of different leadership opportunities for people of all ages. If that's helpful. I can take this one. So there's lots of different.
Thanks,
I
Laura.
can take this one. Perfect.
Sorry. So yeah, as Lauren said, lots of reasons we go camping, and where residential activities are the time when lots of that learning really comes out. I tried lots of things for the first time at Woodcraft Camp. I can't say that a tin opener was one of them that stuck in the mind, but there you are. I thought it was worth just thinking about the different types of activity that we cover by when we talk about camps and residentials. I think I was responding to a query from a district earlier, which sort of suggested that maybe everyone was entirely clear about the terminology that we're using. So that might be very simply using one of Woodcraft's own centres, where you know that it's going to be set up in a very Woodcrafty way, and it's ready for the way that we do stuff. We might be using kind of third-party bunkhouse or hostel accommodation, so that might be an independent hostel, or it might be the YHA or a similar provider. I've just realised I'm probably very quiet. There we go. Is that better? When we camp under canvas, we're often finding ourselves using youth campsites, possibly run by the Scouts or the Guides or similar organisations in your areas, because they are very well set up for the sort of camping that we do. We may sometimes find ourselves using sites that are otherwise public or commercial, and there's a different set of kind of risks and issues that you need to manage there. There might also be groups who are doing what we tend to refer to as greenfield camping. So it's not set up as a campsite. You're using a farmer's field and it's got a tap in, and you're digging latrine pits and using chemical loos and all that other sort of stuff. It's more logistically challenging, but is absolutely fine. And I know lots of districts still do that and have that expertise. I think perhaps a lot of districts are also maybe not set up for that sort of thing in the way that we used to be, certainly when I was growing up in the folk. And then finally, we've got the kind of wild camping or bivvying, sleeping out with very, very minimal equipment. Obviously, the challenge in England and Wales is, unless you happen to be in very, very specific bits of Dartmoor, wild camping is only legal if you've got permission from the landowner. But very often groups will do that sort of thing. And that's a very minimal approach, probably best for some of our older young people, and for short periods of time. So there's a gamut of stuff from the very, very simple and minimal kit needed right up to the very, very complex, large scale district and larger camps that we do. All of which will have their own risks and issues, and stuff that needs to be managed, that you need to be planning for and preparing for. Moving on, so we have for a while had quite a clear series of minimum expectations for groups going away. It is only in the last year or so that we have started, partly in response to our insurers getting hotter on making sure that we are managing risk appropriately, but partly in response to issues, concerns, challenges, incidents that have happened within Woodcraft groups, to make sure that groups who are going away are following basic good practice, and talking about the things that can go wrong when we are doing residential youth work, which is what we're doing fundamentally, and making sure that they are planning to manage those risks effectively. So you need to know, and by the end of this webinar, hopefully you will know what the minimum expectations are and why they matter to us, what you can do to get advice or get some input if you're concerned, either in advance when you're planning your event, or if something happens when you're away, or you've got issues or concerns or complaints that you need to follow up afterwards, where you can get support, and what you need to do to make sure you stay the right side of our guidance. It's all quite topical for youth work organisations at the moment. I'm sure many of you will have seen the coverage in the press about the young man from the Scouts just down the road in South Manchester, in fact, in Stockport, and the inquest into the death of the lad who died on an expedition to the Great Orme. The full implications of that in terms of what we have to do or what we will be asked to do as a youth organisation have yet to kind of become clear, because investigations and things are still ongoing. However, anything that we can do to make sure that we are managing risk appropriately and demonstrating that we are a safe and well-run organisation can only help, both in terms of making our activities safe, but also in terms of demonstrating to regulators and so on that we are not consistently doing things that are beyond our expertise and putting young people at risk. So it's become a conversation which is very topical, not just within Woodcraft, but within the whole of the youth sector, which is why it's a really timely moment to be having this conversation. I'll ask Lauren to take us through the minimum expectations, and I'll probably chip in a bit, but these are effectively the things that when you complete that checklist online in advance of a camp or a residential, these are the things that you will be asked to confirm are in place. So I'll hand back to Lauren to go through those in a bit of line by line detail.
Thanks so much. So as Owen said, these are the things that you will see when you open up the camping and residential checklist. For some people, you might have already filled that in before, and these things won't have changed since you did that, but good to go through and sort of refresh yourself. But then if anybody has any questions whilst I'm speaking, or you think I'm speaking too fast, which I often do in these kinds of things, then just put a note in the chat or wave or something, and I will stop and we can take some questions. So the first part of the minimum expectations is all around event management. So ensuring that we know the site that we're going to, hopefully before we leave. That's an essential, knowing where we're going, making sure that we've communicated that with everybody. So doing a site visit, if it's not a site that we've been to before, if it's a Woodcraft folk site, for example, there's loads of information that you can find out, but you might still want to go and have a visit to the site, see what's there, see what activities are around, and at least pick up the phone to one of our centre managers or centre admin team and talk to them about what is there. Making sure that, as for all of our Woodcraft folk activities, we've got 2 volunteers who have gone through volunteer screening, are members of the organisation, have a DBS or PVG check. We need at least 2 of those who are over the age of 18 at every event that we are running. For every camp and residential, we need a named coordinator and a safeguarding lead, ideally not the same person, so that we've got a team who are working to keep everybody safe and to make sure that the camp is coordinated in a safe and kind of well-meaning fashion. We need to be able to meet our adult to child ratios. So just to remind everybody what those are, if we've got wood chips on site, which is young people under the age of 5, then we want to make sure that we've got 1 adult to every 3 of those wood chips who are around. If we've got elfins on site who are aged kind of traditionally 6 to 9, want to make sure that we've got 1 adult for every 5 elfins that are on site. Want to make sure that we've got 1 adult for every 8 pioneers that we have. And we want to make sure we've got 1 adult for every 10 venturers that we have. Think about your group. Think about who's coming on the event. Think about the fact that if you're going on a weekend, then it might be okay to be on the kind of meeting that ratio and having the people that you need. But if you're going on a longer camp, you might want to have more adults there in order to be able to have days off, to avoid burnout, to avoid leaving things to those kind of core people, and for that to be the same people. If you're going on a 2-week summer camp or a 10-day summer camp, yeah, it's really difficult for adults to kind of take on those roles for the whole time without a break, and I wouldn't recommend it. So I think having extra adults around, people who can kind of fit in and shadow different roles, really important. Got a question in the chat. Does the safeguarding lead need to be present at the camp, or do we need to identify someone in the district if the district lead kind of said? So the event safeguarding lead doesn't need to be the same as your district safeguarding lead or your group safeguarding lead. It can be somebody who's happy to take that on for the event, take on that role for the event. They will most likely work with the district or group safeguarding lead. They might work with Owen as the organisation safeguarding lead to think about the things that might be relevant to know for their role. So talking about the young people who are going and what needs might need to be met. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say they absolutely do need to be on camp, because I think the key part of that, it's not that the safeguarding lead is the only person who will do safeguarding throughout the week, because that's about everybody working together. But their job there is to really keep it on the agenda throughout the week. So make sure that all the adults are aware of what they need to be doing to keep everybody safe, but also to be that named point of contact for anyone to raise any concerns or queries. Now, we need to make it totally clear to our young people they can go with any concern to any adult that they trust. That's really important. But there should be an expectation that adults who receive anything that's that's concerning, that's a disclosure or whatever, would escalate that to the safeguarding lead, so appropriate things can be put in place and followed up. And the reason that should be a different person to the named event coordinator is that check and balance is really important, and it needs to be we're not in the we're a cooperative and collaborative organization, not in the business of running a personality cult. Actually, sometimes people can have problems with the person who is in the lead, and actually having an independent person who's a bit of a check and balance is really important. So yes, it should be a different person. In an ideal world, it should also not be like the partner or immediate relation of the event lead as well, which I know happens from time to time. But yeah, and I mean, just to say, I think this is the area where the minimum expectations really are just that. I think it would be 2 volunteers is the absolute minimum. It would be very, very rare that we advise that. If anything other than like a venture bivvy, you would almost certainly want more adults than the absolute minimum, either the minimum of 2 or the minimum prescribed by our ratios, for a lot of the reasons that Lauren has outlined. It's considerably harder keeping it going for 48 hours than it is keeping it going for 90 minutes at a group night. People do get tired and do need time off. And yeah, don't fly by the seat of your pants at all.
Completely. There was just one more thing on that one, Owen, that the last one on there is that if we are taking different age groups away, so if we're doing a camp that involves different groups, might have Elfins, Pioneers and Venturers all at the same camp, which is lovely when that happens, as we've talked about before, making sure that we've got volunteers who are identified, and as Owen just said, making sure that the young people know who those volunteers are as well. So somebody who's there identified as a sort of supervisor, a volunteer leader for Elfin, somebody who's there for Pioneers or for whichever age groups we have. And again, it doesn't mean that the young people won't go and speak to other adults, and we should encourage that they speak to anybody that they trust, but that they know that they have that point of call. And it could also be, just a time for those adults to check in with that age group every day to make sure that they're comfortable and okay and got everything that they need.
Cool. Thanks, Lauren. Shall I talk about screening? So adults who are coming on the camp, and if you've got DFs coming on camp, those who are volunteering, who are in a position of some authority over other people, need to go through our member, volunteer screening process. That involves them signing up and paying their dues as a member. So we've got their up-to-date contact information. It involves referencing for them. So 2 references, one person who is outside of Woodcraft Oak and independent of the organisation. And also, crucially, an enhanced DBS check. Now, DBS checks are not absolutely vital for every volunteer who's attending a group night, because it depends on the nature of the activity, what they're doing, and how frequently they're doing it. But the rules are really clear when it comes to overnight activities. So anything that involves an overnight stay is automatically in that category of regulated activity, which means that adult volunteers who are doing it, even on a voluntary basis, need a enhanced DBS check through Woodcraft Oak, or they need Woodcraft Oak to have verified their DBS from another comparable organisation. Rules are slightly different in Scotland. Have we got anybody from Scotland on the call? But well, for the benefit of those watching it on the recording, in Scotland, your PVG membership will cover you for outdoor and overnight activities as well as for your group night stuff. But the majority of people in Scotland will have joined the PVG scheme when signing up as a volunteer. But the rules are slightly different in ways that we don't need to go into. Key volunteers, by which we mean the event lead and the safeguarding lead as a minimum, should have completed the safeguarding training. So either a level 1 introduction with your local authority, your safeguarding board, or that National Youth Agency safeguarding and youth work course. They're free to complete. They're comparatively short, but they are very good little refreshers to demonstrate that knowledge and understanding. I'm afraid the NYA have just changed the platform that they use to deliver that. So if you've had a login to it before, you do now need to sign up to it again. We're updating the links on the website to go to the new platform, but it's through their safeguarding hub. But you now need to sign on with what they call Youth Work One, which is their e-learning provider. That's an excellent kind of summary of like the main must know information, signs and indicators of abuse and escalation routes and things like that, but written very much for a youth work setting. It is important that all volunteers understand safeguarding policy and procedures and how to put that into practice, and crucially what they should be doing if they have concerns or a child shares something with them, discloses or raises a concern. The best way to do that is through some level of training locally for volunteers. And there's lots of resources, including like a sort of 1.5-hour session plan on the website, which goes through basic expectations, but also some sort of scenario-based practice, which is probably the best way to bring volunteers, even those who are very familiar with safeguarding from their day jobs or whatever, just to kind of focus them on what that would be like in a Woodcraft setting and how that might differ from the settings that they're used to. So scenario-based practice, some of which are directly about camps and residentials, would very much be a good place to start. Okay. Lauren, do you want to take the next one?
Yes, so the next part is all around managing risk rather than eliminating risk, because we can never eliminate all risk, but we can work out ways to mitigate where possible. So ensuring that every event is the same as it is for your groups, and the way that we run group nights has a kind of safeguarding plan, and making sure that that is shared with others, making sure that we've got a risk assessment to go along with that is also shared with others, looking at which activities we're planning to do at camp, which activities we know that we're going to do, such as having campfires, such as going on a walk, such as playing games out in the open, that sort of thing, such as cooking, and sharing those responsibilities, and looking at kind of who is taking the roles in different areas, making sure that everybody's seen those risk assessments. A risk assessment isn't much use if it's just kept in a kind of toolbox in the kitchen tent that nobody looks at. Making sure that, again, like we said about the ratios and having different people there, making sure that we are risk assessing against the group of young people that we are taking away. So realizing and recognizing the people who we're taking, looking at the different kind of, not necessarily risks that are associated with that, but looking at the kind of safeguarding needs or the additional needs that we might need to be kind of providing for whilst we're away. So making sure that everybody's seen that. Great way to make a risk assessment is to get together with other volunteers and to do that together so that everybody can kind of share what they think the risks are and talk about, as Owen said, kind of share some of those scenarios that could come up and work out how you're going to respond to those if they do, or what kinds of plans you're going to put in place to try and avoid some of those things happening. So looking also at the first aid needs and making sure that the appropriate provision is there. At a group night, you don't need to have somebody who's fully first aid trained. You just need a named person who's happy to kind of administer first aid or kind of escalate things where needed. To do an overnight trip, we recommend that you do have somebody who's first aid trained, especially if you're going to places like Lockbrook, for example, that is up at the top of a hill and you might need to kind of administer some first response first aid before you take a young person to a hospital in a worst case scenario or something like that. So looking at, again, the first aid needs of the group, looking at the kind of medical needs of the group, making sure that we have people who are happy to take on that role as first aider whilst they're away. Looking again, if you've got a district camp of 100 people, one first aider is probably not enough. You might want to look at having enough first aid provision, making sure you've got a first aid kit ready and that sort of thing before you go away. Is there a template for safeguarding assessment? There is I'm not sure if it's still on the Owen. Tell us about templates.
So for your local safeguarding plan, there is a template on the website. That is quite a generic one, which lots of groups will complete that in such a way that it covers them for their group nights and for their residential activities and going away and camping. If you haven't done that, if you haven't written your local safeguarding plan in that way, it is, or actually if you are camping, you normally operate your venturer group quite differently from your elfin group, which would be quite normal, and they're covered by different plans. Or if you're camping with another group or district, it is as well to do a new one that is camping specific. The same headings that exist on that template, like how are you going to manage young people arriving and leaving? How are you going to manage emergency evacuation? How are you going to manage administering and reporting on first aid? They're all still relevant, and all the guidance and things that it links to are still relevant, but you might be describing a different way that you're going to manage venturers going to the shop on their own in groups of no less than 3 or whatever it might be, rather than describing how kids are handed over at the door of your church hall, or whatever it should, or wherever it might happen to be. The other thing that will be different actually on that safeguarding plan, typically the first page of that safeguarding plan has a space for the local safeguarding children's board and things like that team. If you're away, if you're in another part of the country, or if you're camping with other groups, that might need to be expanded. Obviously you'll still be referring young people to the areas that they live rather than the areas they happen to be when there's an issue. But if you're camping with, I don't know, groups from across more than one borough, or camping with a group from another country, part of the country, you might need to put additional information in there. But the headings in that safeguarding plan would still be relevant. It's something we can look at, actually, maybe tailoring that and making it a little bit more camp friendly, because I think lots of groups will have evolved a way of working that works for residentials, but actually we'll take that away and have a look at it.
I've just put a link in the chat to the local safeguarding plan page, which takes you to you can see a Google Doc template, I think, in there. Perfect, thank you.
Sorry, Lauren, can I
Yeah.
just mutter about first aid guidance? So the first aid guidance that's on the site as well, and in the Staying Safe resource drive, doesn't just talk about like qualifications and stuff, but it does also talk about minimum, like what you need to have in a first aid kit and how many kits you should have. And just to go back to the point that Lauren made about appropriate cover and burnout and stuff, you know, if you've got a camp that's going on for a week, you probably want to have more than one first aider, even if it's quite small, because actually otherwise that person is effectively on call round the clock. So just think about what you need to not just cover things safely, but also cover things safely without key adults falling over.
Yeah,
Either
exactly
literally or
that.
metaphorically.
Yeah, needing first aid themselves. I've just put a link in the chat as well to the first aid guidance from the website, so hopefully that's helpful for people. The last thing in the kind of managing risk minimum expectations is around our insurance. So our insurance, which we have nationally as an organisation, covers what might be considered as a kind of usual activity that our groups might take part in, whether that is, as I said before, playing games outside, doing bushcraft activities, going on walks, doing craft activities using tools and that kind of thing. There are some activities that aren't covered by our insurance, like we wouldn't be able to take young people rock climbing, for example, without a qualified instructor. So where we are using those instructors and we're using third parties, maybe if we're staying at a Sky or guide site and doing the activities there, ensuring that they have their own insurance and making sure that we're using kind of trusted activity companies. So again, if you're going through a woodcraft folk site up at Lockbrook or at Biblins where we have adventurous activities, talking to the site about what providers they've used before, and making sure that they provide us with any additional things that we might need to bring in order to kind of be covered by their insurance and that kind of thing, making sure everybody's got their medication when we're going off to do those activities.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. And I think, you know, most people will be familiar with this stuff. But the idea that we should make sure that we've got health and emergency contact information for everybody now, and then also parent and carer consent for under 18s. It's really important that we've got ideally a signed piece of paper or an electronic signature on a form from the parent or carer of the young person that actually tells us that we've got their permission to take their young person away. We've got their permission to seek, you know, first aid treatment, to give first aid treatment and seek emergency medical input and so on, if necessary. Part of that is preparing for every eventuality, and part of that is avoiding difficult questions from authority at a time when you really don't want it, when you present at an A&E. And the more we can do to demonstrate that we are a properly run organisation and we've got the authority to be working with these kids, the better. Just on that, I would always ask for health and emergency contact information from adults as well as young people. Adults, in my experience, are just as likely to injure themselves. They may choose not to give it. They may choose to, you know, withhold key bits of information, which is kind of their prerogative. But at least if we ask, we have done our job and we've demonstrated a duty of care, even if they've, you know, decided not to tell us, you know. For example, you know, I know some adults are uncomfortable in disclosing to their peers what, you know, medication they might be on. But actually, if I put someone in an ambulance, I want a piece of paper I can give to them to say what they're on in case it might be contraindicated. I'd always prefer to do that. If I've asked, if I've given them the opportunity to do that, then I feel I've done my bit. We would strongly advise that you ideally have a meeting, an in-person meeting for all the volunteers who are going to be coming away with you to make sure that everybody's on the same page, go through what your expectations are as a group, how you're going to work together to keep everybody safe, but also to have a fun and enjoyable time. But at the very least, your kind of opening circle when you get to camp with adults and with young people, to make sure everyone understands what's expected of them and how they can play their part. That can be, everything from our ground rules and talking about consent and all of those things to just the physical boundaries of do not go out of sight of the main tent circle, do not go into the barn or the cursed graveyard or the whatever it is, and spelling that stuff out when you get onto site. I know some groups, particularly with younger kids, tend to do almost like a beating the bounds, like walk the boundaries of the site and go, this is where you cannot go without an adult. And again, making sure adults understand that, because it wouldn't be the first time that a woodcraft group had been hunting high and low for a kid, only to discover that their parent has walked them off site to go to the shop or go for a little walk without telling anybody. And it's just that kind of sharing of the expectations about, no, this is different to going away with family and friends. You're in a group and you have to function as part of a group. Is something that sometimes adults need spelling out to them as much as the children do. And then finally, ideally your program will be planned in advance, because when our groups get into difficulty, it's usually when they are winging it, where something has been switched in at the last minute or not planned out. If we plan our activities, we can make sure that we've got the tools, the resources, volunteers with the right skills, and that we can think about the risks that we need to manage in advance. There will always be the need for a plan B. It tees down with rain on the day that we're going to do the day walk, and it would be imprudent to press ahead with it. But you can plan a level of the plan B in advance as well. So the best program is one that has been planned and is well within the capability of the volunteers that are delivering it, ideally with a bit of slack, because it wouldn't be unknown for somebody to be, feeling a little bit under the weather by the third day of camp, and not up for leading the walk. So always think about doubling up where you can. Lauren, back to you for transport.
Perfect. The last part of the checklist just focuses on transport, so transporting people, but also transporting equipment and that sort of thing to our camps and residentials. Probably more likely with the equipment to a camp, but sometimes to residentials we might be taking things with us as well. So ensuring that any volunteers that are driving young people or equipment have the appropriate licenses to do so, making sure that people have the right insurances to take other people in their car, that they're not using a car that they're only insured to use for business, for example, and taking young people away. Making sure that any vehicles carrying equipment, whether that's your car or a van that you've hired or a lorry that you've hired if you're going on a bigger camp and taking big marquees and that sort of thing, making sure that the equipment that we're carrying is within the legal weight limits of the vehicle that you've got it in. Sometimes it's better to get a bigger vehicle than needed just to ensure that you're not sort of over. There have been quite a few incidences in the past where people have overloaded lorries and vans, and it's not always been most positively overlooked by the authorities. So always best to make sure that we're going within those legal weight limits where possible. Really hard, obviously, not to have scales outside the container that you keep your stuff and weigh everything that's going in. But as I say, potentially getting a big enough van that you don't need to worry about those kinds of things. Or if young people are traveling on the train, for example, and you want to take some luggage with you, having a big enough vehicle that you can sort of take people's luggage or take any extra things that you might need to take. So just a word of advice for everybody there.
Yeah, that one's really important, because ultimately it will come back on the individual driving the vehicle if there is any comeback, and that's going to have personal consequences for people and potentially quite expensive ones. So we want to make sure that we are going into it with our eyes open and not asking volunteers to do something that's either dangerous or illegal or both. So that's a really important part of our duty of care to our volunteers and to our fellow adults. And if that means we need the bigger van that's going to cost a couple of £100 more, we need to bite that bullet, and we need to have that conversation with, you know, with the adults, with the parents and carers that are paying to send their kids. You know, I would rather people coming on camp were asked to pay a couple of quid extra than that we put volunteers in a dangerous and potentially expensive situation, which is really important. Okay. So I hope by now we are comfortable with why the checklist is important. I think, you know, most of people who are experienced in running camps and residentials will find that most of the things are, if not second nature, then certainly just good prompts to do stuff that is good practice, that's not going to be putting a massive demand on people to do things they wouldn't have done anyway. But I think for people who are maybe less experienced in running camps and residentials, it is really valuable as a kind of thing to go through, and go, oh, have I done that? And so on. Lauren, have you got the thing up? Do I need to, if I stop sharing, do you want to take over?
Yeah, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. This is
so
the
this is
part
where it sits actually on the website, isn't it?
exactly that. This is where it sits on the website. The way that you find that is to come up here to this 4 groups drop down, and then you can see their camping and residential. So you can come to this page, which kind of the home page for camping and residentials, gives a little bit of explanation of some of the things that we've just talked about. Why do we go camping? Looks at those kind of basic minimum expectations. Gives you lots of other information, as Owen said, for some people who have done this 100 times, or for people who are doing it for the first time. Really useful stuff around venues, transport, food, you know, menu ideas, ratios of how much food you're going to need for different amounts of people. Looking at how you can kind of help each other and look at finance and budgeting, things around wild camping and bivvying, and then a glossary, really useful. Again, for people who have done it 100 times or for their first time, looking at some of those words that woodcraft folk often use when we're talking about camping and residentials, just to help everybody understand. So down at the bottom of this page, you can see those, what would you call those, kind of resources. There you go. Resources, lost my brain. Resources, and the kind of more details there about venues and food and all of those things. If I bring you over to the tab here, did it change tab? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. This is the camping and residential checklist that we have been talking about. This is what it looks like. Fairly easy to fill in. You need to know your own name. You need to know which group and district you're coming from. An email address so we can get back to you in order to support you with anything that maybe came up in this form or any questions that we might have. Looking at when you're going away on your event. This is really important as well, because through this form we can see whether perhaps 50 of our groups are maybe away at the same time over the Maybank holiday. Let's say lots of our groups like to go camping then, and that can help Owen and the safeguarding team to know that 50 of our groups are going away that weekend, and therefore have maybe more provision over things like the safeguarding email, or sharing information about how people can get in touch, because when we've got kind of a mass amount of groups away at the same time, there might be more phone calls or emails coming in to them. So we also want to know how many volunteers you're taking approximately. Don't worry about those kind of last minute signups. We understand these, or cancellations, these things can change, but an approximate, looking at where you're going, who the camp coordinator is, as we said, who the safeguarding lead is, who are you taking, and then going through those things that we have just gone through together around event management, looking at having volunteers identified to be responsible for each age group. If you're only taking one age group, you can just say that this is not applicable. Going through all of those things that we just spoke about. At the bottom, there's a space for any kind of other relevant information. So that might be that you're actually leading a bivvy, but that you've got permission from the farmer whose field you're going to use. That might be a question that you have for Owen or the safeguarding team. That might be things like, we're taking our elfin group away for the very first time and we're really excited, or something like that. When you click submit, if you have ticked all of those things, yes, and you've kind of given us a good idea of what you're doing, then we will say have a great weekend, and that's great. If there are things in there that any of the safeguarding team want to follow up with, then they've got your email address to get back in touch and to show some support of how we can help you make sure that you're meeting those ratios, make sure that you have everything that you need to run a safe and enjoyable weekend. Another great resource on the website, which you can find from that kind of camping and residential homepage, as I said. Where is it? Not that one. It's this document here, which is aimed at Woodcraft Folk volunteers who are coming on their first residential. So giving them an idea of the basics of what to expect. It might be that you want to edit this slightly for people who are coming to your events, and there are things specifically that your group do. If you always only eat red Skittles on the first night of camp or something, you might want to include that in here. If you always only wear blue t-shirts on the first day, include that in here so everybody knows what to wear, knows to bring their red Skittles, that kind of thing. But these are the basics of what we kind of thought everybody might need to know. So looking at what to expect, making sure people understand that if they're going camping, they're probably going to be expected to sleep in a tent, that they're probably going to be cooking outdoors. Looking at links there to the kind of kit list, the jargon buster or glossary again, talking about things like plans. Some people might have never done that before, about how meal times are a kind of communal time for people to eat together. Looking at kind of different program activities. Again, you might want to make that more specific for what you're doing. Also highlighting the importance of that kind of downtime, rest hours, making sure that volunteers don't burn out. And then looking very briefly at the end around what is expected of volunteers who are coming to camp. So again, like Owen said, making sure that when we're on a camp or a residential, that we're there for everybody. We might have our own young people there or people that we're connected to in the sort of outside of camp world, but ensuring that whilst we're at camp, we're trying our best to be there for the whole group and to take on board, you know, all young people's needs, and ensuring that everybody is safe and happy as possible. Looking there also kind of encouraging young people that if you're not sure, encouraging volunteers that if you're not sure what to do, then to kind of ask somebody, maybe shadow somebody else in a role to get more experience about that. So that's a really useful document that's just at the moment, I think, called Have a Good Weekend on the website. You can find it on the Camp and Residential page.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. I think, yeah, we were aware that we were kind of felt like we were on the receiving end of more and more queries that seem to stem from maybe that lack of understanding, particularly as we find now we tend to go away with, particularly if you're taking elfins away, you tend to go away with more adults than we might have done in the past. More parents are coming to accompany their young people, and it's really helpful, I think, to have something to give people to explain how it might be different to going away with a group of mates or going away with an extended family, just so that they know what to expect. As Lauren said when we came in, what we're doing is we are building a temporary utopia, a temporary community that resembles more closely the world as we would like to see it. Everyone has a part to play in that, and being clear about what that is and what that looks like is really important if people are to take their place in it. It's got a really valuable role in terms of preparing people for the reality of what they're going to be part of, and that can help support people who maybe, you know, are neurodivergent and would really like some advanced organisers to explain what it's like, but actually it's really helpful for everybody to know what they're getting themselves into. I think we've also got some groups have put together things like social stories and stuff about going on camp for young people. So if that's particularly relevant for your group, then ask us and we will see what we can dig out. None of it will be perfect for you, and I think it will be a case of adapting it to what you know about your group and your young people. But yeah, I will just hello, I will just go back and share. So Lauren has mentioned some of these already. So that camp and residential section, which we overhauled last summer, has got lots of stuff, everything, as Lauren said, from like recipes to how-tos, the checklist and the FAQs, and the Have a Good Weekend that we've just run through. The other things that I would recommend that you take a look at, there is an organisation called the Outdoor Education Advisors Panel, and this link is on our site as well. If what we've got in place doesn't answer your questions, like by all means ring me up and say, you know, what do we do about this? But you can also go and take a look at the OEAP guidance. So they've got thematic sheets about all sorts of things. So there's stuff on adventurous activities and what you need in place and what instructors you need. There's stuff about there was a really good one. So with the Leonard inquest, the stuff around sort of supervising young people, particularly supervising like older young people, teenagers, and you know, who we obviously don't watch every single second of the day. But I had somebody asking around sort of practicalities for doing what we tend to refer to as a parachute drop, where you drop the young people with a map and they have to navigate themselves, and you're providing that sort of arm's length supervision. They've got a really good fact sheet if you're doing something like that about what good arm's length hands-off supervision for older teenagers looks like. For example, there's one about how to handle like residential activity with young people who are in a relationship, and all like loads of detailed stuff that's kind of not just Woodcraft, but is, you know, lots of people from lots of organizations who deliver outdoor education and residential education. So it's really kind of brains trust stuff. So go and have a browse of that if you want. The other thing is we've already mentioned the NYA's training, but they also have their what they call safeguarding and risk management portal, which has got a load of stuff around. Take care, Debbie. A load of stuff around risk management, risk assessment, dynamic risk assessment, helping you understand what all that stuff is and means and what you should be looking for. I was having a look just before we came on. They've got a checklist for like what you should be looking for if you go on a site visit to a new residential centre that you've not used before, and what you might need to look at and be worried about. So that again is a really useful resource. Finally, I'll mention, just in case you've not, or someone in your group hasn't already talked about it, we are about to renew our insurance. Those of you who've got like your own camping kit in your group or district, we can provide like all risks insurance cover from that. So if I don't know about the insurance cover that you're wanting as a group or district, I think I've written out to everybody, but not everybody has replied. If you want to know about that, then give me a bell afterwards or drop me a line, because we can provide that information and we can get you onto the insurance if I know by the end of the week how much kit you need covered. So yeah, that's just another thing we can offer out. I think that's everything that I had to say. Lauren, anything else from you? Or
no, just that the staff team have many different skills. So if you are worried about anything, or you want any ideas for program, or you want any ideas for, you know, things that aren't maybe on the website, although there is a lot on the website, or you just want to have a kind of chat through things, then we're always here when we're at our desks to talk about those kinds of things.
Absolutely. And Lauren and I will give you the official answers, but we also both run groups and have run residentials ourselves. So, you know, we're couched in the realities as well. For that kind of more like programming stuff, and if you just want creative ideas, then actually other volunteers, and particularly like things like the Around the Campfire Facebook group and things like that, are always really good. You ask a question on there, you'll get half a dozen usually relatively sensible and creative suggestions. So I would, I would think about that as well. Like,
The only other thing that I would just add to plug Camp 100 whilst we're here is that that thing. Next year we'll be celebrating our centenary, 100 years of Woodcraft Folk, which is really exciting. To celebrate, we will be hosting an international camp next summer. So really, whilst we're going on our camps in 2024, I would like to hope that lots of people are thinking about preparing to come to international camp next summer, thinking about what equipment we're going to bring, thinking about some of those things that we've talked about today, staying safe, because they're really important as well when we get to those bigger, large scale camps, and really important to have those contacts, have those complete those trainings that we talked about, but also a great time at international camps to share experiences and to learn new things, learn new songs, learn new ideas, new ways of making campfires, all of that kind of thing. So just a little plug for Camp 100 there.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren. Yes, that was remiss of us not to mention that earlier. Anything